Today, we will be discussing learning technology to build and sustain classroom communities, right? So it's a real pleasure to have two amazing colleagues with us today. First, Dr. Maria Khotimsky is a senior lecturer in the Department of Global Languages. She developed and leads the Russian language curriculum, teaching it sort of at all levels. Her work includes research on the history of literature translation, cross-cultural exchange through translation, and content-based language pedagogy. Today, she's going to share some tools and resources used for her community building in language and literature classes. So thank you for joining us today. Next to her, I'm also joined by Dr. Michelle Tomasik, who's a lecturer in the Department of Physics and an MITx digital learning scientist. She currently works on developing online classes and assists with physics education research in teaching introductory physics. I think they just did a quiz, so thank you for running over right after that and joining us today. I know it's a busy time for both of you, so thank you. Dr. Tomasik will share her experiences mentoring and fostering belonging in 802 primarily today during the conversation. So just to give everybody a little bit of the lay of the land, we give the panelists the questions beforehand to give them an idea to think through some of these ideas and maybe share some things through slides. So I'll ask some questions and then sort of hand it over to them to let them discuss as they sort of see fit. So Dr. Tomasik, we'll start with you, if that's okay, and then I'll sit down. So how do you get to know your students in the sort of first few weeks of the term? And were there sort of digital resources that you leveraged to be able to do that, to sort of get to know them and engage with them in the early part of the process?
Yeah, so we're talking about building community and about sort of how I, specifically how I get to know students to begin with. And I actually want to start by telling you a little bit about the particular class that I teach. Should I do a... which, there are some people in the audience who are very influential behind starting this. So I teach in the TEAL method. So this is technology-enabled active learning. So the technology is actually right there in the name. This is 801 and 802. For those of you who are not familiar with this class, these are our big introductory physics classes. They're general institute requirements, meaning all the undergraduate students have to take them. Not everybody takes them in the TEAL format, but a lot of people do. And this is sort of a schematic of our classroom. So you can see there's no real front of the classroom. There's whiteboards all around, and there's these sort of circular tables. So right from the beginning, our classroom is actually set up for building community, which is really, really nice. And I don't have a particular place to be either, which means I also have the opportunity to really walk around and get to meet all of our students. So we're blessed with having this wonderful room that helps build this community if we choose to. But we actually have to make sure that we don't do a lot of lecturing in the room so that we do have time to build this community in the classroom. So one of the digital tools that we use for that is MITx, which thank you guys. And this is just sort of a snapshot of one of our pre-class learning sequences. If you're familiar with MITx, you know these symbols at the top sort of mean like reading, videos, and problems. So it's a mixture of mostly videos and problems, a little bit of reading. And the problems are meant to be pretty simple problems before class, just to make sure that they actually do it before class. The videos are short videos that they can watch. And this is how they get the content delivered originally. And so they have a basis to understand what we're talking about in class. And so we actually can have them work together, and I can come around and get to know them each individually as they're working on these problems in class. Oh, actually, I meant to say back to this slide. Let me just actually tell you one more thing about the teaching structure. So it's not just me in this room with a bunch of students. There's an instructor for every section. There's a graduate TA for every section. There are several undergraduate TAs. There's a technical instructor. And all of us are prepared to help students with the physics and also sort of to guide groups working well together. And so even though every undergraduate student has to take 801 and 802, we have small-ish classrooms. We have something like 50 to 100 students in a classroom at a time. And that teaching team is working with that same 50 to 100 students all the time. All right, but they all get the same pre-class assignment no matter what section they're in. So they have this pre-class assignment that they do on MITx. They ask each other questions about it on Piazza. They ask us questions about it on Piazza. And then, so I was thinking about this question. Another way I think about what it means to get to know my students is to know sort of where they are in the learning process. So in class, we give a lot of in-class concept questions. So you can see over here, this is sort of an example of a concept question that we'll ask in class. And then we ask them to answer it. And we have a poll. This is, again, on MITx in real time, that we get a histogram. And so you can see there's a distribution of answers here the first time we ask this question. And that tells us we need to spend some more time here. So what we often do is actually ask them to discuss at their tables. And this is actually what we got asking that same question, that same group of people, a second time after their discussions. So luckily, this yellow one's the right answer. And so I think this is a really powerful tool because it really allows you in real time to assess how students are thinking about these questions. And then gives a great use of building community here where they're actually discussing that question with each other. And then as the instructor, we often follow up and also sort of give sort of a summary at the end. But by then, honestly, they've sort of already figured out where their misconceptions were. All right, so the next thing that I think is really helpful for making students feel like they belong in the classroom and feel like you care about them is, this is, I think, what everybody says and is really hard, is learning names. Right? So I have 74 students in my class right now. I do not know 74 names, but I do know something like 25 names at this point, which I think is partially because every time on Friday, when they're just up at the boards all day anyway, I ask them all to write their names on the board, and so I kind of go around and try to learn who is who then. But I also, the digital tool that I use for this is Canvas. So since they're working in the same groups of 3, we have our undergraduate TAs make up a spreadsheet that we upload to Canvas. We import it, and we have groups. So this is the groups on Canvas. These are actually the undergrad TA names, which is nice to know. And I can go through this and say, all right, I know this person's at table 2. I know they work with this other person. I can try to figure out. And then also the other helpful thing on Canvas is this thing called PhotoGrid on the side. So I can, they're not exactly linked, but I can find a name and then go find the photo and see if that is the person I'm thinking of. And that's a really helpful way, I think, for me to learn names of the people in the class. The last way I wanted to sort of mention or talk about how I get to know my students is actually how maybe my students get to know me. So in the spring 802, and I'll talk more about this in the second question, we do something that's called a belonging intervention. And as part of that, I tell them a story about, when I was the first time I saw physics in college, I thought I didn't belong. I thought everybody else was smarter than I was. I thought I was going to fail. I didn't think I could do physics. And I talked to them about how I overcame that and how I ended up being a physicist, right? And so I think that listening to that story often helps students see me as a person that they can relate to. This is 802. This is a class that a lot of students are really scared of. This is a class that students feel like they have those same feelings that they don't belong and they can't actually manage to do well in this class. And I think hearing this story helps them feel like I'm on their side. And I think I've had a lot of students come up to me after class that first day and say, oh, I was really nervous about this class and I feel a little bit better now. And I think that helps me find the people who are feeling that way, and it helps them know that I'm on their side. So I think those are sort of the 3 different ways I was really thinking about, getting to know your students at the beginning of the semester.
Perfect, thank you. So I'll frame this out by saying, that's one example, and so I think the same question, but from a maybe slightly different angle in terms of class size, the structure, the sort of the way in which the content gets discussed in your courses.
Yeah, thank you very much. Should I stand up?
Sure,
Will it be
please.
easier to
Please,
hear? Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
Do you want me to
probably
turn
just
this off?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I'll have slides for the second part. Thank you very much, Eric, for the introduction, Jovi, for inviting, and everyone for being here. I'm speaking on behalf of several of my colleagues in the global languages. Our classrooms are quite opposite. We teach classes ranging from 5 to 20, maybe 25 students. But I'm humbled by the fact that we are part of our students' intellectual intellectual journey. If you think of their semester at MIT, and we just recently did a unit on academic schedule where they had to state the time of the recording and narrate the course of their full semester. The recordings I received came in at 11 p.m., 1 a.m., 5 minutes before class. But all of them had an humbling array of courses: astrophysics, music conducting, political science. So we as a HAS class very often are an elective. They choose to come on this journey with us. And I think of our classes as being part of their larger MIT journey. These 53 hours that I get to spend with them in the classroom and perhaps a bit more in their homework are very meaningful. And perhaps the root of this journey is defined by our course goals and curriculum, but how we take this journey, we as instructors can make a tangible difference in their learning experiences. So what do we do to be successful on a journey? When we started, I would like to share 3 things with you: how we prepare for this journey before the class even begins, and what we do in the first few weeks of classes to help our community of language and literature scholars come together. So ahead of the semester, many of our instructors utilize a student survey. I'm sure many classes here do as well. What we try to include is not only personal information such as name, the preferred form of address, and their favorite pronoun, but also a little bit of a learning history. Because our classes are small, we can actually gauge where they are, what's their previous language experience, and how should we tailor our material based on that. In addition, we try to ask our students' area of expertise so we can then draw them in meaningfully into the discussion or call on them since we know they've really mastered a certain concept in a prior class. And then finally, we also ask them what their goals are for this semester, for this journey, and how does their language study fit in with their other interests, so we can then create some supplemental materials for the class. We try to review these surveys as the semester begins and as we prepare for individual conferences with the students. I think the second important thing, if we think of this journey, it's a group journey as well. So our job as teachers is to help students come together as a community. And one of the tools that has been helpful for that is Flipgrid, which has been recently rebranded as Flip, and thanks to IS&T, it has now Canvas integration. Many of our instructors utilize this video discussion. It's a bit more lively and personalizable than video discussion on Canvas. And as the class begins, I think many of our colleagues assign the first discussion post, just introducing yourself, talking about your background in the language you're learning, or even in a beginner class, just saying hello, the first word you learn in class, and then giving a personal introduction. As an instructor, you can log in and respond with quick hello to each of the students, and then you can also provide individual feedback in Canvas. This simple tool is very easy to use, has a quick learning curve for instructors and students. It takes us a long way, because right now most of us are still wearing masks in class. I made an exception today. The power of smile, the power of human connection, the power of learning your students' names and faces means a lot for discussion-based classes, so that tool has been actively employed by many of our colleagues. Moving on, for example, if your students have to practice lightning pitches, short presentations, or short performance elements, Flip videos are also an excellent tool for that. And then lastly, and it might not work for large classrooms, but for discussion-based classes and project-based classes, we utilize a lot of student-teacher conferencing, and we try to do it in the beginning of the semester, especially if your students will be working on a project that they're developing throughout the term. We try to book an appointment to meet and discuss this project, to discuss their interests, to help them find a project topic perhaps. In terms of tools, well, we used to have Google Docs and our office door. Now we have Zoom, we have scheduling tools such as Calendly or many others, and instructors have been taking advantage of that. But to summarize and to come back to what Michelle was saying, I think all of these tools, an introductory survey, a video greeting that helps them say hello to each other and their instructor, and individual conferences, they all convey the sense that we care. We care how this journey goes. We're with them from the beginning, and we're as excited to start this journey as they are. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much both for sharing. Two things struck me. One is obviously the desire to gain information about the learners that are in your class, right? And trying to understand that through surveys, both groups, through interactions, through setting up the sort of norms of the classroom. I think the other thing that struck me in terms of just like scalable practices for everyone is the early exposure to the resources. So the getting used to, okay, I know I'm going to use Flip, and so here's an opportunity early on for me to get to know my students and for them to use this tool that we're going to try to leverage through the rest of the class. Same thing with the MITx sort of system and being able to get in there early and engage with those. I think getting an opportunity to build the community and engagement with the tools that you're going to use in the rest of the class becomes a big part of it, which actually is I think a good transition to the second question I have. So, how do you just sustain those efforts to build the community beyond that initial piece? I think everyone gets familiar with the what do my students like? How do I interact with them? Where are they starting? What do they do? What are their interests? And then it quickly sometimes devolves into, and now we have to do the content right away. Now we're into it's chapter 4 and we're on. But so the question is sort of how do you continue to engage the community and the aspects of the learners, and maybe what tools might you switch to or continue to use as that journey sort of continues through the rest of the semester?
All right. Well, all right, let me go back to my slides. So I think one really nice thing that we're able to do in the TEAL classes is that every single class, students are up at the board working in groups. And this is something that they don't just do at the beginning to get to know each other. They do this every single class period. And I think this really does form a strong bond. And we've heard anecdotally from a lot of students that the bonds they form in their groups of 3 in the TEAL class last their entire MIT career and beyond. And I think that's because they're spending 3 days a week, they're spending a lot of time with these people working on these maybe challenging problems. But I think it's just the exposure that really does a lot here. So having this as a built-in part of the course that we just do every single time, I think is really helpful. And as you said, it's not something that we just do at the beginning and then forget about. I also wanted to talk about some sort of broader efforts that we have. So I'm also involved in the physics mentoring program. And so this is relatively new, actually. This was started by Professor Ed Bertschinger in spring 2020 when we kicked everybody off campus. And it's really grown and evolved since then. So in general, we pair sophomores through graduate students. So anybody second year and above, graduate students, postdocs, instructors, technical instructors, professors, everybody with students in first and second year physics courses. So it might be a junior who's taking TEAL, and they will be paired with a mentor. But in general, it's mostly first and second year students, and it's often first year students in the TEAL classes and second year students who are intending to be physics majors. And they're paired with people, actually speaking of surveys, we actually do get to know them pretty well before we pair them. They're paired with a mentor who can either help them learn about MIT in general if they're first year students, or really feel like they're a part of the physics community if they're taking the second year courses and intending to become a physics major. And they're required to meet. So we ask them, once that we pair them, they're required to meet one-on-one in either one-on-one or in small groups weekly throughout the semester. This is not sort of a optional if you want it that week to help on your PSET. This is sort of, you're signing up for meeting one-on-one every week. And this really, it's intentionally building that mentoring relationship, not just sort of a tutoring relationship. And as we've been building this program, one of our goals is actually really to build a stronger community across the physics department in general, and not just within the individual classes. Although I do think this does have a benefit of making people feel more like they're able to tackle those individual classes. And for the small groups, they're meeting weekly, they're getting to know each other pretty well. And I think we have mentors coming back semester after semester, and they tell us they're coming back because they really like the community that we've built in the mentor program. And so I'm kind of hoping, maybe this is trickle-down economics might be a failed flurry, but I'm really hoping that the trickle-down community is really going to help here, because I think our mentors have a very, very strong interest in helping these students feel like they belong and that they can do MIT, and I think that will really help the students themselves. And this semester, we've added a pedagogy class for our first-time mentors, and this is because the continuing mentors said at some point, I don't need to hear the same presentation about metacognition anymore. Right? I know about this already. So for the first-time mentors, we're giving them once a week we meet. We have them do pre-reading. We meet and discuss various sets of topics. And then we also meet weekly with all of the rest of the mentors. And that's really nice to sort of establish that community of mentors. And one other tool that we sort of use for maintaining this community is Slack, which we have integrated through Canvas. And this works in a small group like our mentors, rather than, it would not work in our 700-person 802 spring semester class. But it does work to sort of build that community among the mentors pretty well. All right, the other sort of bigger project that I wanted to talk about in terms of a sustained effort is actually around the word that I've used a couple times now, this word belonging. So I've actually done a lot of this work with Professor Kirsten Perez, who is now actually at Columbia University. But this is actually a picture of her pretending to be a student in the top of the slide. But this idea of belong is really important, right? So if you feel like you belong there, it's a positive feedback loop, right? You're going to engage. Oh, sorry, somehow something got moved in this slide. So there's a, All right. You're more likely to engage with your peers. You're more likely to engage with the class material in general. I'm not really sure what that was. Sorry, guys. Oh, no. All right, I'm just going to delete it because I don't know what it is. All right. You're more likely then to actually understand the material because you've been engaging with the class and with your peers and with your instructors. And then you're going to get positive feedback from being with your peers that you like, doing well on exams, right? But the opposite is also true, right? There's this negative feedback loop if you come in feeling like you don't belong, right? If you don't belong, you don't feel comfortable asking for help. You don't feel comfortable interacting with your group. And therefore, you're not going to enjoy being in class, and you're not going to do well on the exams because you haven't really been afforded that same opportunity to learn. And so it's really, really important, I think, for us to think about belonging, especially, we know this in 802, in a class that students are not choosing to take, in a class that so many students come in afraid of. And actually, we don't just know this anecdotally, so we also have used surveys as a tool, although actually, we've used surveys as a tool after the semester is over. This is a piece of, we've done a survey on belonging specifically to all of our students since 2017 who have taken 802 in the spring, skipping 2020 for some reason. And about a week after the end of the semester, because we didn't want to screw with their mentality going into exams, we asked them a bunch of survey questions that were designed by a social scientist, not by a physicist, to really tease out whether or not they feel like they belong in the classroom. And what we found from this survey from 2017 for the next couple of years was that nobody really feels like they belong, but especially women really don't feel like they belong. And when we there's a lot of different pieces to this. So we were able to tease out that the real thing that's causing women to feel like they don't belong is the interactions that they have with their peers. And so we now feel very strongly that what we need to do is set the tone. We need to somehow get those interactions to be better from the beginning. We need to let women feel like they belong from the beginning, and that's really about changing the culture from the beginning of the class. And so this is where I talked about the belonging intervention earlier, where I told the story. We also had the students themselves do a writing activity. This is Google Forms, so this is yet another digital tool, and I think this is nice because it can be completely anonymous, and it is actually anonymous. We cannot trace it back to who that student was. Unlike Qualtrics or some of the other things that we might have done, we maybe could trace it back. This, they know, is actually anonymous. We asked them to think about, this is in the spring 802 that we do this. So they've had some time at MIT. We asked them to reflect on sort of what's been hard and just reflect on that. And then they think about, so this is an activity they do by themselves. They hear my story. And then they interact as a group and they talk about why some people might feel like they don't belong and what they can do about this. And this is actually based on an intervention by Chandralekha Singh, who did this intervention and saw really positive results for women in a physics class and for non-white underrepresented minorities in a biology class. And her theory about why this works is because it actually changes the culture, right? It gets the people who might be saying those harmful things to realize that what they're saying might actually be harmful. Because it's not that it's students blatantly saying like, oh, you're a girl, you don't belong here. But it's just subtle things that they're saying that are making the difference, because the women already are coming in feeling like they don't belong because it's a physics classroom. They've been told their whole lives that women don't do physics. And so they're coming in already feeling like they might not really belong, and then just small stray comments can send them feeling like they don't belong at all. And so this is an intervention that we have been trying. Again, this was something we did at the beginning of the semester, so it doesn't quite fit your question of throughout the semester. But the goal is actually to influence the group interactions throughout the semester.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that what you've done is something that carries forward, and the way in which you can reference back to it, and the way in which it's a sort of tentpole moment for that continuing conversation throughout the, hey, do you remember this? Like, it's a way to redirect folks without having to start from scratch all over again every time that redirection might need to happen.
Right.
And you've got a shared understanding. I think one of the things that I sort of noted here that I'm curious as we sort of transition to hear what you've been working with is the way it provides an opportunity across the whole instructional team, right? So in your setting,
yes,
that's a big part. It's not just one instructor with a set of students and maybe you build that relationship. It's a group of instructors with a group of students that have to collectively engage in that space. And I think having this thing that everyone can grab onto becomes a really big part. So we'll transition. I'm curious to hear what approaches you have in your smaller classes to continue that engagement with your student groups over the extended period.
We have a terrific resource at the Teaching and Learning Lab. Maybe some of you use it already, but Janet Rankin and Amanda Baker not only have a website that can help you create and draw on different resources, but also they are available for individual consultations to help tailor the service to the pedagogical needs of your class. So following on what Michelle said, I think when we were encouraged to talk about different tools, I thought about the tools that help us to engage the students in class and decided let's start with a little experiment, and I encourage you to please either use your smartphone or go to that link. And there's just one question about classroom community and what it means for you. So please scan this. I hope it works. There we go. Now it's grown. So let's see if we can zoom in, right? So let's look at this together. We have attention, belonging, empathy, care, understanding, communication, cooperation. So many of these emphasize working together, right? Exchanging ideas, building students' confidence, but also building emotional belonging, what Michelle so powerfully addressed. So I would like to discuss some tools that help us structure our class sessions, but also foster these elements of community. And this quick response tool, Mentimeter, is actually one of the first ones I wanted to highlight. It's very easy to use, as you just witnessed. And I'm happy to share the slide with you after the presentation. Extremely easy to use. You can do these word clouds for warm-up, for brainstorming, and really jump into the discussion. It has a very nicely visual ranking system, similar to the poll that Michelle shared. Likewise, great for starting a discussion. It has an open response. So really an anonymous tool that can get your shy and quiet students put their ideas on the board and put them into the discussion. And you can successfully use it both as an icebreaker, as the beginning of the class, but also to wrap up a discussion. Say if your classroom has been doing a debate or presenting several pitches, then you can have a little vote and see how the group decides. So this feedback tool has been easy to implement, and students respond positively. They really like, for example, when the rankings are going on, they like to see how they change, what the dynamic is, and it actually adds more food for thought and ultimately food for conversation. These are applicable to literature and culture classes, of course, when we discuss narrative structure and students pick their favorite favorite story, we then get to analyze what makes the story successful, what grabs you as a reader. So simple tool, but can take you a long way. And what it does, it brings the community of learners together. Students share not only their ideas, but also their attitudes, their emotions. This is a newer tool, but I know many of you have been using it already. Many instructors in language and literature have been very happy with the ability to integrate it through Canvas. And what it helps us achieve is not only do some vocabulary or some content work, but to start the conversations ahead of time. Students can create annotations, they can upvote each other's annotations, they can send a question to the instructor, and they can prepare questions for guest speakers. For example, Professor Kate Brown was presenting in one of our classes, and students really had a chance to engage with her reading. It was a wonderful conversation. Not only did they read the text, they already started certain discussions and debates in their comments. So I think Perusall is one of those tools where, as Eric said, you have to go through chapter 4, you have to cover these readings, but you're simultaneously building a community of inquiry. You're building shared knowledge as opposed to each of them taking notes and speaking up in class. And there are many analogous tools, but once again, this one has an advantage of being integrated in Canvas. And then one more tool that is relatively new but has already been used by several instructors in global languages is called Thinglink. It's a media annotation tool. You can have images, visual images like 360 images, you can have film clips, and students can add their individual tags, which can include text, audio, and video commentaries. So one of the projects instructors in several language classes have done is creating an interactive map of MIT, and students discuss their favorite places where they do work and research, and if they have the group consent, they actually can share this map with parents who speak the same language, and Parent Weekend is upcoming. So this year's cohort of students who've been working on this map has already decided they will be sharing it with parents before they come to campus. And this tool is, again, might be new for some of you, but it really makes students engage with the content, and it helps create student-generated content. So I'm sharing an example from another class where throughout the semester, students explored a certain region and worked on building a resource. And this is a project by a student who explored Lake Baikal region and the communities that live around it. And as the semester goes on, students do their research and continue adding tags to the map, talking about houses, talking about food, talking about communities of faith. And this is a unique resource created by each student, but then they spend discussion time in class to share it, to present it, and it avoids the linearity of the PowerPoint, right? And also you can add a lot of music and visuals and make these discussions really interactive. Not only are they learning new content and practicing the language or the subject you are teaching them, they are also creating a work of art, right? Something that will stay with them, something they can bring home, share to their parents, perhaps translate. I'm missing one slide, unfortunately, but I also wanted to briefly talk about game elements, and that's probably the last point I want to make. Games have been great for many subjects, but what we found is interesting using a game for review purposes, but also using student-generated questions for questions for the game. When you combine, say, undergrads can prepare questions for a physics practice quiz or a physics review, and you pull on their questions. So there will be 1 or 2 or 3 in the audience who have written those questions and who happily know the answers. So you can gamify your review process by drawing on student generation content. And I think as educators, we can leverage these tools to maximize these moments of emotional connection to the content they study, intellectual connection, and group work, right? Group inquiry. So I think these are the key points I wanted to share with you, and thank you very much for listening. And thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So that's a preview of to come, but I want to just pause for a second and give you both a chance. One of the things that struck me about both of the sort of things that you've chosen to present here is that it's meant to be a continual engagement with the group. I think oftentimes we get caught up in the, well, we're going to cover this, and so this tool will allow me to present this one thing, and then I don't come back to it again, or oh, we'll start doing this, but then we realize keeping up with this is it's an investment. Like it takes energy and effort away from other things that maybe we were doing in the past. So I'm curious if either of you can speak to some of those decisions about, why have you made, Michelle, you've talked a little bit about the belonging, but are there other pieces that made the decision to go forward with this? And likewise, maybe it means one less reading that has to happen this week, but it means different types of engagement. I'm just curious on your thoughts on this.
Oh, well, I mean, actually, something that struck me in what you just said, apart from the belonging, was there are so many. I mean, these tools look amazing. I want to use all of them, but I do think you're right that you have to limit what you're using, and you have to continue to use them throughout the semester, or you overwhelm the students and they're not able to focus on what you're trying to teach them because they're trying to learn the new tool. But yeah, so you're right. When we made the decision to put the belonging intervention in, that was taking out the first day of class material, right? And luckily, actually, we were able to do that because we put the first day's class material as a pre-class, actually for the next class, because we didn't want to have any pre-class work on the very first class. So it was fortuitous for us that sort of we had already intended to take that out and not give them pre-class work. But when we are trying to decide on, do we have them work on groups on this experiment in class, or do we just do this extra topic, right? That's always a long conversation that I think has to be. You really have to start with what are your learning objectives, and what are you, and community for us is always one of our learning objectives for 801 and 802.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Michelle. That's an extremely important point. I think what you pointed out, learning objectives and community building could already be a great criteria for choosing your tools, right? So if a tool allows you to engage the students while reflecting, reviewing the materials, or developing new content, it's a win-win, right? When I discuss the, technology in language learning or in literature learning with my colleagues, I like to share an idea of a toolbox, right? So I do like warm-ups and word clouds. So I have a tool that allows me to create effective and quick icebreakers. I think collaborative reading or collaborative annotation is very important. So I will pick a tool that allows me to do that. And then for final projects, I've used a variety of tools in the past, but I will pick one and try to test it out throughout the semester. So I think, cognitive load of a new tool is something that we as educators have to seriously take into account. And when choosing, I guess we can think of learning outcomes, but also a tangible project that the student produces. If that tool allows them to create something beautiful, something more than a PowerPoint, that will stay with them, that they can share with others easily, perhaps it's worth a little bit of time investment. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And the other thing that I think is interesting in that space is the opportunity for the students to become their own learning community. So we've talked a lot about belonging and the engagement with the instructors, but it's also engagement with one another, as sort of you've both pointed out. I think that becomes a really big part of the thinking. So it doesn't just have to be the instructor being the one who's responsible for facilitating feedback or learning opportunities. It can be the building of the community. So I imagine in both situations, in class and even through these annotation tools, it becomes about the learners helping the learners engage in the content, rather than it always having to be a redirect from an instructor or a piece in that way. I know we're gonna run up on time because you've got to run to class, so I want to just take one last moment and sort of give a quick little pitch to everyone who might be around. So this is the Canvas resource for instructors page. You might be familiar with this from the site, and you can always get to it from this little help button over here. So if you're ever in need of resources, let me just show you. It's right there, Canvas resource for instructors, so make sure you check that out. But the reason why I wanted to pull this page up is you might be interested in some of these tools, or maybe you're like, hey, what other tools are there? I didn't know about these, maybe there's some others. And there are. So if you go to this full list of external tools, there's a really great table that our colleague Lauren Titino put together, and it sort of gives you an idea of what's available and what's out there. So I encourage you, if something struck a chord with you today, or like, oh, I wonder what else might be available, please check this out. And most importantly, our team is always here and happy to have consultations, have conversations, talk about what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve, and then maybe help point you in the direction of some resources that might be of value to you. So most importantly, thank you both so much. This was absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful you spent your time and energy to put this together for us. Please welcome and thank them, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
I think the quick reaction is they become better readers. They read better, they read more attentively, and then it facilitates class discussions, and students have commented on that, and instructors have also pointed out that having these annotations really helps get the class discussion going and help them see more in the text. It gives us more work, right? Because if we are fair to them, we do try to read through all the annotations to pick them to structure the discussion in class, but it's well worth it, I think.
Data only applies to the physics context. But I mean, I actually think from anecdotal evidence talking to students, I actually think a lot of it is physics and math. I think a lot of students come here from high school having a lot of interactions in high school that have told them that they don't belong in physics and math. And so I think it probably extends as far as physics and math for a lot of the women coming in. And I should say, we actually did also try to separate out first-year students and underrepresented minorities in our data set, and actually did not find a strong effect the same way we did between women and men. But I mean, we also did not have as much data, right? So we did not find a statistically significant difference.
It depends on the goals of the lesson. So if we want them to read the entire 30 pages, we give a very specific annotation assignment. For example, highlight the 3 questions you have on the text, or highlight a concept that you would like to discuss in class. And if it's a close reading assignment, then it's a smaller text and then more fine, types of annotations. But absolutely. So I think as with each tool, you think of your learning goal, you think of the feasibility and what the students will actually have to do. So it's a fantastic tool, but I think we as instructors took some time at getting used to it and making sure we formulate these annotation tasks well, so they become productive points for class discussion or for student learning. But yeah, so thank you. It's a great question about being cautious with these types of tools. Yeah.
And actually, how, if at all, have you considered the data that comes from some of these tools, or student feedback as a source of data to make some of these decisions, to sort of go, oh, well, turns out we pushed too far on this one, and maybe we need to do something differently for the next round?
Well, one really nice thing that we have in the 801 and 802 learning sequences, which was meant to be the pre-class assignment, we've been aiming for a very specific time that we want the students to spend on it. And my colleague, Aidan McDonough, actually put together these really nice, you couldn't see because I hadn't selected that, but the very last question in every sequence that we have is, it's a reflection page. So they're meant to, we gave them at the beginning, we gave them the learning objectives for that, and we asked them to rate themselves on the learning objectives at the end. But then we also ask them, we give them a box and ask them, how much time did you take? And then, like comments boxes. And it's a little hard to, because it's on MITx, it's a little hard to get that data and review it before the classes, but I've been reviewing all of that data from the previous semester to revise the learning sequences for this current semester, and I get people ask good questions that mean I need to add in more explanation here, or I need to fix this problem, and I've been doing a lot of editing and cutting down based on that feedback. It's really nice to have that feedback.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that and we'll run to class. In addition to asking students for feedback, actually Perusall allows you to see the time they spent on the assignment, so that's a good reflection. Again, this is quite new. This is the second year we're using it in class. So we will be making adjustments both on the data we see and on the feedback from the students. So surveys, again, they come back mid-semester, end of the semester, and we try to listen to the students' voices, but we also try to look at data as well. So. Yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Perfect.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, this is perfect. Thank you, everyone. If we can give them a round of applause again. Thank you all for coming.